time for this debate has expired and we will move on to questions. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I seek leave to make a statement regarding a ministerial absence.
Is leave granted? There being no objection, leave is granted.
I thank the Senate. I advise the Senate that Senator Reynolds will be absent from question time today, Tuesday 8 February, and tomorrow, Wednesday 9 February 2022, for medical reasons. In Senator Reynolds' absence, Senator Ruston will represent the Minister for Government Services and the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and Senator Cash will represent the Minister for Education and Youth.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care Services, Senator Colbeck. Minister, is the aged care system in crisis, yes or no?
The Minister for Aged Care Services, Minister Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Thank Senator for the question and attempting to answer it for me. Mr President, I'm not here to play word games. The aged care sector is suffering extreme difficulty because of COVID-19, particularly the Omicron strain at the moment. There's been significant commentary with respect to the state of the sector over the last week since Senate estimates last week, and yes, Senator, the Prime Minister made his statements and views known as well. Mr President, my focus is to work to support the sector to help them to get through the current situation. It is extremely difficult, Mr President, and the work that I've been doing all through the pandemic, Mr President, and let's remember we are in a global pandemic here, is to work with the sector to assist them to get through the current situation. Well, Mr President, the ANMF, to take up the interjection from Senator Watt, described it as a crisis in 2012 when you were in government. So, Mr President, so let's take that. So some of us remember that. And Mr President, we were the ones that had the courage. We were the ones that had the courage to call a Royal Commission, no matter how difficult that might have been for us as a government. And we were the ones that have responded comprehensively to the Royal Commission, Mr President. And the only response we've had from the Labor Party and Mr Albanese is that we'll spend more than the other lot. 12 months after the Royal Commission's reported, and that's all we've got from Labor, Mr President. We'll spend more than them. Mr President, we have committed over $18 billion to reform this sector. We've commenced the process of reforming and legislating the reform through this government, Mr President. So we're not interested in word games. We know how tough it is in the sector right now, Mr President, and we're doing everything that we possibly can to assist the sector to work their way through this extremely difficult environment.
Senator Gallagher, a supplementary question.
Yes, thank you, Mr President. Has the minister told the Prime Minister that he was wrong when he acknowledged the aged care system was in crisis?
Minister.
Why can't you acknowledge that?
Mr President, again, as I said, I'm not interested in playing Labor's word games, Mr President. My focus, and the Prime Minister's focus, I might add, in all of our conversations in relation to aged care is how we assist the sector work their way through the COVID-19 pandemic. That's been our focus all along. Have we got everything right, Mr President? No, we haven't. And we've admitted that. We've had the courage to admit that. We haven't played nasty personal games like the Labor Party have. We haven't gone down that track. Not a single constructive discussion or contribution from those on the other side, Mr President, but we have put all of the resources at government towards the support of the aged care sector, and, Mr President, that's what we will continue to do. That's what we'll continue to do. We are very comfortable continuing to work cooperatively with the aged care sector, the providers who we talk to on a regular basis, and their peaks in the case of helping them to work their way through the current situation.
Your time has expired. Senator Gallagher, second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. While hundreds of older Australians in his care have died and more than 1,000 aged care homes were dealing with outbreaks, this minister went to the cricket for 3 days. When this minister thinks going to the cricket is more important than protecting elderly Australians in his care, isn't it time the minister resigned?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. And again, Senator Gallagher knows exactly what I was doing and when I was doing it, and she continuously and dishonestly, Mr President, misinterprets,
Senator Watt.
misrepresents the circumstance. She knows that I spent most of Friday working on trying to deal with the issues that aged care were facing at the time, including blockages in supply chains that I might admit a lot of industry around the country were dealing with that at the time, which was inhibiting the supply of crucial supplies out to aged care sectors. Mr President, I made some decisions with respect to the events that I attended over that period of time, Mr President, but I was always available and always continued to work in respect of the support of the aged care sector. People will criticise me as they will, Mr President. I have to take that on the chin, Mr President. But
Minister, your time has expired. I'm not going to call Senator Bragg until there is silence in the chamber. Senator Bragg.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. Can the Minister please advise the Senate how the Liberal and Nationals government is taking action to strengthen the economic recovery and create jobs as we move to the next phase of the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic?
Order. Order. The Minister representing the Prime Minister. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I thank Senator Bragg for his question, and I know his relentless focus on how we help Australians through the challenges caused by COVID-19. And globally, we've seen yet another wave of the challenges resulting from COVID-19, just as we see the waves of COVID-19 continue. The most recent waves that have challenged the globe, of course, have been the Omicron wave, seeing a huge spike in case numbers right around the world, but thankfully a less severe variant than has previously been faced. I want to thank all Australians for what they have done over the past 2 years, but particularly during the recent summer season in the face of the global challenges of COVID-19. Together, the resilience, the efforts of Australians have achieved remarkable outcomes. Some of the lowest fatality rates in the world, some of the highest vaccination rates in the world, some of the strongest economic outcomes in the world. More than 51 million vaccinations have been applied across our country. More than around 94% of those aged over 16 fully vaccinated, and more than 9 million people having had a booster. Now, Mr President, there are no silver bullets to dealing with COVID-19. We have to continue to work through the ever-changing circumstances. And as we do that, we are able to continue to work towards the normalisation of the treatment of COVID as we live more effectively with COVID with a highly vaccinated population. From the 21st of February, just 13 days, we will see our international borders reopen to tourists, giving a much-needed lift to our tourism industry, a further step in our economic plan that has kept Australians secure in their jobs, kept Australian businesses stronger and has enabled our economy to withstand its biggest test in decades. We are one of only 9 countries in the world to still have a AAA credit rating intact, even with the spending incurred through COVID. Our inflation is well below that of other advanced economies. Our unemployment rate is at a 13-year low. These economic outcomes are facts, and they're testament to the fact that Australia's policies have worked to help keep Australians safer and more secure.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Bragg, a supplementary question.
Thank you very much. What has been the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Australia's employment situation, and what are the expectations for the year ahead?
Minister.
Mr President, despite all the challenges that have been faced, more Australians are in work today than ever before. More Australians are in work today than ever before. Indeed, 1.7 million additional jobs have been created during the time of our government. Unemployment today stands in its last recorded figures at 4.2%. That, Mr President, is a 13-year low. These are economic outcomes that would very much be the envy of so many other nations of the world. Just 1 year ago, unemployment was at 6.6%. It's now at 4.2%. We see women's workforce participation at its highest level, and more than 1 million additional Australian women in jobs than was the case when our government was elected. Youth unemployment has fallen to its lowest level since 2008. Again, investment in trades, in apprenticeships, has helped to drive outcomes there, protecting young Australians from the ravages that previous recessions and economic downturns have inflicted upon them.
Your time has expired. Senator Bragg, a second supplementary.
Thank you very much. What support is the government providing businesses to allow them to grow and continue to employ Australians?
Minister.
The last two budgets our government has handed down have been focused on the economic recovery plans to keep Australia's businesses strong, safe, secure, to keep Australians in jobs and to help us work through the continued uncertainties of COVID. And they have worked, Mr President, they have worked in terms of supporting those businesses, hundreds of thousands of livelihoods and Australian businesses. Our continued support through tax relief for Australians, more than 11 million Australian families enjoying the benefits of lower income taxes, $1.5 billion a month extra going into the pockets of those Australian households, Mr President. The support of the Home Builder program and the Home Guarantee scheme, seeing more than 300,000 Australians helped into home ownership even in these challenging international times. Our $110 billion pipeline of infrastructure projects, the 220,000 trade apprentices in training. These are the consequence of targeted, effective policies that we have put in place to help keep Australians secure.
Senator Bilyk.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care Services, Senator Colbeck. How many Australians in aged care have died from COVID-19 since the 1st of January 2022?
The Minister for Aged Care Services, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Since the 1st of January this year, there have been 12,088 infections into residential aged care in Australia. That's residents who have contracted the virus. And, Mr President, of those, of the latest data that I've received, 587 have passed away, Mr President. And I might add at this point that that 12,000, just over 12,000 infections in 2022 is off the back of over 2 million infections in the Australian community. Over 2 million. So that's off the back of over 2 million infections in the Australian community. And Mr President, the interjections from the other side demonstrate that the Labor Party aren't interested in the reality of the circumstance out there. They're only interested in playing their cheap, nasty, dirty, personal politics. That's what they do. That's what, Mr President. And can I say, I would like to put on the record, Mr President, here today, my thanks and congratulations to the sector and the workforce for the work that they have done through the pandemic and Mr President, their improved performance. Their improved performance, Mr President. Mr President, so in 2020, 7.5% of infections in this country were in aged care. In 2022, 7.5% of infections were in aged care. This year, Mr President, that number is 0.6% of infections. And that is a result, Mr President, of the work that the sector's done in conjunction with government, Mr President. That is due to the infection control leads that were put in there and funded by the government back in 2020. It's a result of the infection control training that aged care workers and providers have put in place. It's put in place, Mr President.
Your time has expired. Senator Bilyk, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How many Australians in aged care who died from COVID-19 since January had not had their booster shots?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. Mr President, as we indicated to the COVID committee last week, that data is not available to us at this point in time because of lags in reporting through the state committees of births, deaths and marriages. To ensure that we can receive that data, Mr President, as you've said, Senator Keneally, we've put in place a task force to pull together that data and provide it to the community, to the parliament, in a more timely way, Mr President. It's very important information for us all to understand, Mr President. But in terms of the boosters, in the context of the boosters, we started the booster program on the 8th of November last year. On the 12th of November, or thereabouts, we got advice to bring the dates forward. And on Christmas Eve, Mr President, we got advice to bring it forward even further, which we have done.
Your time has expired. Senator Bilyk, a second. A point.
It's a point of procedure, perhaps. I've noticed that the
I'll
minister
give you
has
some
regularly gone over
latitude, Senator
time.
Keneally. Sorry.
I apologise, Mr. President. A point of order, please.
Go ahead, Senator Keneally.
Thank you. I noticed that the minister has regularly gone over the time, and I'd draw your attention to that.
I have called the minister at the time of the clock expiring. Senator Bilyk, second supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. A task force after 22 negative reports is pretty pathetic, really. Instead of fixing the supply of PPE, fixing workforce shortages and fixing the booster rollout, this minister, Senator Colbeck, went to the cricket for 3 days. How many Australians in aged care need to die before this minister, that's you, Senator Colbeck, finally accepts there's a crisis on his watch and resigns?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was going to say it's nice to see Senator Bilyk back after an absence, which it is. Thank you for the question. Mr. President, Mr. President, the focus of the government all the way through the pandemic has to be work with the health system, to work with the aged care sector, to support both of those sectors, and that's been one of the foundation elements of our approach to managing the COVID-19 pandemic. It is a pandemic, Mr. President. People will catch the virus, and there will be the inevitable, unfortunate outcomes of that, Mr. President. We continue to work every day to clear the issues up that crop up in relation to the pandemic. Mr. President, we've acknowledged publicly that we had some supply chain issues with supply of PPE. We've got additional assistance to the National Medical Stockpile to support that. We've supplied over 9 million rats to residential aged care centres since August to support them in their efforts, Mr. President, and we will continue to do that.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, President. My question is to Senator Birmingham, representing the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has said that he's committed to making workplaces safe, but Commissioner Jenkins' earlier report, Respect at Work, made clear that a positive duty on employers is critical to achieving that. Your party voted against that, but then we were told at last estimates that consultation on the positive duty would start in December with a view to implementation by late March. We're now in the second week of February, with only a handful of sitting days before an election, and none of this has happened. How can women in this country have any confidence that this government is committed to making any workplace safe for them?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. I thank Senator Waters for her question, and at the commencement I acknowledge that that my colleague, Senator Cash, and the government have been pursuing action across a range of areas in implementing recommendations from the Respect at Work report, a very valuable and important piece of work undertaken by the Sex Discrimination Commissioner in terms of advancing equality and opportunity across Australian workplaces, and the government's comprehensive response there has been released. Senator Waters' question, you relate specifically to recommendation 17, the positive duty recommendation, which the government's been clear we believe requires further consultation to assess how such a duty would operate effectively alongside existing duties that already exist under various work, health and safety laws, and indeed under the Sex Discrimination Act, including the duties to ensure that additional complexity is not created for those seeking to use such protections. So we are working through those consultation processes to make sure that any changes that are put in place operate as intended and do not result in unnecessary duplication, confusion or uncertainty, either for employers or employees. The vicarious liability provisions in the Sex Discrimination Act and model work health and safety laws already place, I'm advised, a positive duty on employers to protect workers from health and safety risks, including psychosocial risks such as sexual harassment, so far as that is reasonably practicable. Employers must therefore already take reasonable and preventative steps, such as implementing appropriate policies and providing—
Minister, please resume your seat. Is this a point of order, Senator Waters?
Yes, reluctantly, President. I did go to the question of timing. I'm aware of everything else you've said, but I'm interested. You said consultation would be done and it would be implemented by March. Where is it?
Senator Waters, you've brought the minister's attention back to part of the question. The minister was being directly relevant to other parts of the question. Minister, you have the call.
Thanks, Mr. President. As I indicated, my understanding is the consultation is underway. I'm not advised in terms of any variations around timelines or the like on that matter, but we are certainly working through that process as the other recommendations of respective work continue to be pursued.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Waters, a supplementary question.
Thanks very much, President. This morning's statement committed to listening to survivors and staff, but the Prime Minister is reportedly not going to listen to Grace Tame or Brittany Higgins at the Press Club tomorrow. He's not even going to watch it on the telly. How can women in this country have any confidence that this government will actually listen to survivors? Do you think Australian women even believe a word the Prime Minister says anymore?
Minister.
Thanks, Mr. President. Well, Mr. President, these are important matters, and important matters that I would hope could exist and be discussed above cheap political potshots or point scoring, such as occurs in the question there from Senator Waters. I have no doubt, Mr. President, no doubt that the Prime Minister will indeed be seeking to ensure he understands the messages and views that are conveyed in tomorrow's Press Club address, as he does in terms of other statements of importance that are made across the country. He recognises the important work around Respect at Work, which is why, under Prime Minister Morrison, our government has been pursuing the vast majority of those recommendations. Some 42 of the 55 recommendations under Respect at Work have either been fully implemented or fully funded, and work is underway on all remaining recommendations. As we discussed this morning, it is now in relation to that other report of Kate Jenkins set the standard.
Has expired. Senator Waters, a second supplementary question.
Thank you, President. Despite government commitments that survivors would be invited to today's Statement of Acknowledgement address, we've heard from a number of survivors who participated in the review who didn't know about the statement until they heard about it in the media. This is not acceptable. What went wrong? And what message do you think that sends survivors?
Minister.
Thanks, Mr. President. Well, Senator Waters, I thanked you earlier today, as I did everybody else across the chamber, for the constructive way in which we engaged in these matters. I'm disappointed in relation to that question, that you would raise it in that way. As I have said publicly today, my office asked the Australian Human Rights Commission last week to contact all those that they had contact details for who had participated in Commissioner Jenkins's review. My understanding is that they did that, Senator. That is my understanding. Now, I can't speak for contacting those individuals because, as you well know, we put in place legal protections for all of those who participated. So the government had no way of contacting all of those who participated in the review. We did, as you knew I had said we would do, and as I had said publicly we would do, which was to ask the AHRC to do that, and my advice is that's what they did.
Senator McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Workforce, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash. Can the Minister update the Senate on how the Liberal and National Government economic plan is delivering new jobs across Australia?
Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Senator Cash.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I thank Senator McLaughlin for the question. And, Mr. President, this government, the Morrison government, we are a job-creating government. And when you look at the labour force figures in December, they were positive news for all Australians. They show that new businesses and new jobs are being created right across the country. Mr. President, this government's economic plan has always been based around getting Australians into work, creating jobs and getting Australians off welfare and into work. And that is exactly what's happening as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. When you look at the evidence in relation to the employment figures, the unemployment rate has decreased to 4.2%. That is now lower than when we came into office in 2013. The participation rate, that's Australians putting their hands up and saying, I'm ready, willing and able to work, it continues to be strong, remaining steady at 66.1%. More than 60,000 jobs were created in the month of December. And that, of course, is because of those fantastic employers across Australia. What that means is that employment is now at a record high in Australia, with 13,242,000 Australians in work. There are, in fact, now 246,600 Australians in work than there was prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. When you look to the employment to population ratio, that itself has increased to 63.3%. And underemployment, people often ask about underemployment. That has now decreased, that is a good thing, to 6.6%. So, Mr President, when we talk about putting in place the right policies so that businesses out there can prosper, grow and create more jobs for Australians, the statistics speak for themselves.
Your time has expired. Senator McLaughlin, a supplementary question.
Can the minister advise how the government is helping young Australians find a job?
Minister.
Mr President, the government has been acutely focused on ensuring the scarring impact recessions have on young Australians were not felt in the COVID-19-induced recession. We've invested heavily, as we know, and quite proudly, into the skills and training system. That has, of course, helped businesses to retain staff, because quite often it's the young person, the apprentice, that is the first person let to go, and we've ensured that by our investment in the skills and training system, employers have been able to keep those young people and those apprentices on. And this, of course, further supports that pipeline of workers in Australia. We have invested by way of the Boosting Apprenticeship Commencement Wage Subsidy, the Supporting Apprenticeship and Training Wage Subsidy, and again, this has now ensured that more Australians have trade apprenticeships than ever before in recorded history. That is a good thing, Mr President, but it is because of the investments made by the coalition government.
Your time has expired. Senator McLaughlin.
How is the government's plan helping Australians who want to work and secure employment?
Minister.
Well, Mr President, again, when you look at the evidence based on the policies that the coalition government have put in place, when we look at where we were at the outset of COVID-19 and where we are today. If you recall, at the outset of COVID-19, Treasury was modelling at the height of COVID-19 that unemployment could potentially go as high as 15%. What they were saying was 2 million Australians could have been out of work. And then you look at the policy response from the coalition government. Look at where we are now. In December 2021, the unemployment rate has dropped to 4.2%. We're at near record high participation. That is a good thing. Over $300 billion in health and economic support provided through our economic plan has helped us to reach this point. Mr President, it is because of the policies put in place by the coalition government that Australians are in work.
Your time has expired. Senator Watt.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care Services, Senator Colbeck. Since the 1st of January this year, Jeddah Gardens Aged Care Home, south of Brisbane, has experienced a major COVID-19 outbreak. 15 residents have died, and a total of 100 residents and 82 staff have tested positive. When did booster vaccines first start being administered at Jeddah Gardens?
The Minister for Aged Care Services, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Senator Watt is right. There has been quite a significant outbreak at Jeddah Gardens, unfortunately, and the numbers that he's quoted in his question are the latest figures that I've had. Unfortunately, Mr President, I'm able to say that the situation at Jeddah Gardens has stabilised. There was a lot of concern over the weekend, and Mr President, I am cognisant of the question, Senator Watt, so I'm not trying to. But Mr President, there was a lot of concern over the weekend at Jeddah Gardens when somebody quite irresponsibly started a rumour that the facility was to be evacuated by the Defence Force. It caused a huge media storm. Mr President, this is an important point because it's caused enormous distress to the families. Mr. President. The booster clinic, I'll deal with the booster clinic and I'll deal with the rest of it, Mr. President. The booster clinic, scheduled and brought forward from its original date at Jeddah Gardens, occurred on the 31st of January, Mr. President. Mr. President. And of course, there are a number of other methods through which aged care residents can get a booster shot. They can have a GP. They can get a GP or a pharmacist to come and do it, Mr. President. They can attend a GP clinic, Mr. President. So aside from the facility can run its own clinic and we'll pay for the cost of that, Mr. President. But I just want to go back to the point that I've made, because it's a serious one. The distress caused to the families by the clearly irresponsible rumours that were started in Queensland at the weekend is outrageous. Fanned, might I say, by the opposition. Fanned by the opposition irresponsibly. Unfortunately reported by the media before being... Mr. President...
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Watt, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. In damning reports issued in March and September last year, the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission found that care at Jeddah Gardens failed to meet aged care quality standards, including the safety of residents' care and the facility's preparedness for a COVID-19 outbreak. Why did the minister fail to take urgent action last year in response to his own regulators' repeated findings of non-compliance?
Minister. Order.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister,
Mr. President.
resume your seat. Senator Watt, to interject before the minister has even had a chance to answer the question is highly disorderly. Minister, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the regulator throughout this pandemic has done its job, which is what it did last year, Mr. President. And the regulator worked with Jeddah Gardens to bring them back to compliance. That's the role that they do, Mr. President.
Senator Watt.
Mr. President, Watt. That is the role that the regulator has, Mr. President. That is the role that the regulator has. And the regulator has taken further regulatory action, Mr. President, in relation to Jeddah Gardens.
Senator Watt.
And the government has taken additional assistance measures as well, Mr. President, as the outbreak progressed. Clinical first responders and an Aspen team in there to support the facility in relation to their infection control procedure and their processes within the facility, Mr. President. So we have continuously monitored the facility and we've put in place the measures and the additional resources that have been required to support the facility through the outbreak.
Your time has expired. Senator Watt, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. President. This minister has ignored repeated warnings about workforce shortages, PPE shortages and ignored the alarming failures at Jeddah Gardens exposed by 2 reports in the last 12 months. And now 15 residents have died and 100 residents and 82 staff had tested positive. When will this minister resign?
Minister.
Mr. President, over the course of the pandemic, the government has continued to work with the sector to support it with respect to the measures that need to be and the advice and the measures that need to be put in place to manage COVID-19 through the pandemic. And, Mr. President, as I've indicated in an earlier question today, the sector has performed extremely well in the context of the number of infections in aged care compared to those in the broader community. My thanks and my congratulations again go to the sector and the workforce who have done a magnificent job in managing this, Mr. President. We continue to work with the Quality Commission to ensure that all providers meet the quality standards. That's the role that the Quality Commission has, and it continues to work on that in that sense, Mr. President. Of course, the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic have been absolutely tragic, and I extend again my condolences to all of those who have lost loved ones as a result of the pandemic.
Your time has expired. Senator Chandler.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister for Women's Economic Security, Senator Hume. Can the minister update the Senate on how the Liberal and Nationals government is supporting the economic prosperity of Australian women as we reopen the economy?
The Minister for Women's Economic Security, Senator Hume.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Chandler for her question and her enduring commitment to women's economic security, which reflects the enduring commitment of the Morrison government. In fact, the Morrison government's economic plan is clearly working. Today, there are over more than 1 million more women in work than when we came to government. Let me say that again. More than 1 million more women in work under a coalition Liberal national government. Now, this is not something that happens by accident. It can only have been made possible because of the economic policies that have been put in place intentionally by this government. We currently have the highest women's employment to population ratio than Australia has ever seen before. More Australian women in work than ever before. Women's workforce participation is hovering at record levels, and women's underemployment is steadily heading consistently down. All of this achieved with the background of a global pandemic. Importantly, there are more opportunities for Australian women to work, to take up an apprenticeship, to upskill, to reskill, to start a business and to take on those better and higher-paying jobs than ever before. And our government's commitment to enhancing the economic security of Australian women extends well beyond economic management. In the 2020-21 budget, we made a landmark commitment and investment of $1.9 billion to improve the affordability of childcare by increasing the childcare subsidy for families with multiple children. For women who want to return to the workforce, to take on training, to take on study or to volunteer, their decision to take on childcare, to reduce the cost of childcare, is made more affordable for them. But improving women's economic security is only part of the goal, Mr President. On top of our economic policy—
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Chandler, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the minister outline to the Senate how the government is securing the economic future of Australian women?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr President. And yes, I can. Let's be clear. From skills, to childcare, from leadership to board appointments, and most importantly to job opportunities, we are backing Australian women to get the choices and chances that they deserve, that we deserve. Australian women can rest assured that this government's economic plan will maximise opportunities as we continue to recover from the pandemic. I can certainly promise you, Mr President, that we won't be slugging them with higher taxes. We won't be proposing a retiree tax, for instance, damaging their retirement savings. We certainly won't be bringing in $387 billion of new or higher taxes, smashing their jobs and robbing women of opportunities. And while the childcare subsidy is currently up to 95% for those families with 2 or more children who want to work, who want to study or who want to volunteer, we certainly won't be bringing in free childcare for millionaires while regular women work longer and longer hours to pay the taxes to pay for such a scheme.
Order. Order. Senator Chandler, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the minister explain the importance of a collaborative approach across government and industry in reducing barriers to improve women's economic security?
Minister.
Yes, thank you, Mr President. So the Morrison government recognises that improving measures like the gender pay gap requires a commitment and a targeted policy and a partnership between industry and between government, between the private sector and all levels of government. But before I talk about what's ahead, let's talk about what is in the rearview mirror. 17.4% gender pay gap when we came to office. Now it's 14.2%. But there's more to do. There is no doubt about that. And as a government, we believe in policies that actually shift the dial. Policies not put in place for show, like your policy to give millionaires free childcare, but policies with genuine substance. That's why the Women's Budget Statement this year committed to a full review of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency to determine how government can further work alongside the private sector to collectively close the gender pay gap. The Gender Equality Act requires that employers with more than 100 employees can be required to report to the Gender Equality.
Minister, your
goodness
time
me, I didn't get it out.
Has expired. Senator Lambie.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is for Minister for Finance, Minister Birmingham. Minister, there are 75 politicians up here right now who own a second home in Canberra. Each and every one of them can claim the full rate of travel allowance, nearly $300 to sleep in the comfort of their own bed this evening. That's $20,000 in free money going out to 75 politicians tonight alone. I reckon it should be illegal for politicians to claim full travel allowance to sleep in their own bed. It's not allowed anywhere else in the country, so why should Canberra be any different?
The Minister for Finance, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Thanks, Senator Lambie, for the question. Mr President, the rates of travel allowance and arrangements for travel allowance are set independently through the Remuneration Tribunal. It's been a long-standing practice that in relation to the rates paid for members and senators to stay in Canberra, that relative to the rates paid in other capital cities, there is a discounted rate applied in Canberra, recognising and indeed encouraging members and senators to make longer-term arrangements in relation to their accommodation in Canberra. Now, that's a private matter for each member and senator to undertake, but the government stands by the independent process of the Remuneration Tribunal on these matters.
Senator Lambie, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. I think we get that. No one is breaking any rules here. Politicians are allowed to claim full travel allowance to stay in their investment properties in Canberra. I'm not denying that, but as the Finance Minister, do you seriously have no problem with politicians using travel allowance to pay their own mortgages and then come out with a nice hit at the end when they leave Parliament? Do you have no issues with that?
Minister.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, Mr President, I'd simply make the observation, as I indicated in the primary answer, that the rate that is applied for overnight stays in Canberra is assessed in a slightly different way by the Rem Tribunal compared with the rate for commercial accommodation provision in other capital cities of Australia. So in terms of the cost effectiveness for the government's finances, Senator Lambie, it would concern me were we in a situation that changes were made that indeed potentially increased the cost by increasing the nightly rate that was paid. So again, I back the independent processes there to seek to find the right approach to respect taxpayers' dollars, to minimise costs where possible, but to ensure that indeed recompense is made to enable members and senators to make their own arrangements for overnight accommodation as is necessary in Canberra.
Senator Lambie, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, Anthony Albanese, no one's getting an inch here, by the way, billed taxpayers $17,000 in travel allowance to stay in his Canberra flat while Sydney was in lockdown last year. He says he has no plans to change the rules either. He doesn't see a need to. So I just wanted to clarify this. To the best of your knowledge, that the Liberal Party, the Nationals and the Labor Party are on a unit ticket because of their own sense of self-entitlement when it comes to claiming this money from the taxpayer.
Minister.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, I reject the assertions made there, Senator Lambie. What we are indeed backing is an independent process that has been in place for many years for the Remuneration Tribunal to make independent assessments at arm's length from politicians. That we are not. I'm not as Finance Minister. Mr Morton is not a Special Minister of State responsible for setting the rates, terms or arrangements for travel allowances. It is, of course, the fact that every one of us here, aside from Senator Gallagher and Senator Seselja, travel here away from our homes, and perhaps Senator Molan, yes, Senator Molan, travel here away from our homes, do, of course, then incur costs of some form or other in relation to the accommodation while we were here. As I said, it's been a long-standing practice the Rem Tribunal has applied in terms of the flexibility of that, but that is also reflected in the different rates as they are calculated, and that's why the independent approach is the appropriate approach.
Senator Ayres.
Thanks, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care Services, Senator Colbeck. When former New South Wales Liberal Premier Mike Baird and the current CEO of Hammond Care called for the ADF to be employed to aged care homes to assist with the staffing crisis on the 12th of January, Mr Morrison rebuked this suggestion, saying Defence Force personnel were, and I quote, not a shadow workforce. Just 26 days later, Mr Morrison backflipped Isn't this just another example of the Morrison-Joyce government doing too little, too late?
The Minister for Aged Care Services, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it's a pity that the good senator wasn't listening to what the Prime Minister said yesterday, because yesterday the Prime Minister reaffirmed that the Defence Force is not a shadow workforce for any workforce in this country, but particularly for the aged care workforce. What the announcement that we made yesterday was, Mr. President, was to pull together some targeted support for aged care facilities that were in significant distress, Mr. President. That's what we announced yesterday, and to build teams in each state to support providers in each state. The Defence Force is not a shadow workforce. It is not a shadow workforce. The Prime Minister said that when the proposal was first put on the table, and he repeated it again yesterday, Mr. President. So it would be nice if Labor senators opposite actually took notice of what was happening, rather than just playing their politics, exploiting the pandemic, rather than doing what we're doing, which is dealing with the pandemic, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, we continue to work with the sector to provide them with the resources that they need in support of their management of the pandemic. Important decisions like the advice that the Chief Medical Officer made early in January, so that more staff could go back to work quickly and safely in support of the residents in the residential aged care facilities. A significant decision, Mr. President, that has made a real difference in the capacity of the aged care sector and facilities in particular to maintain their workforce and support residents. The supply of rapid antigen tests, which are now going to every aged care facility in the country, Mr. President. 2.5 of them dispatched last week in support of the facilities that have an outbreak, the facilities that have contact, and the facilities that require them for screening, Mr. President. The supply of PPE, where there were some issues coming out of the national stockpile, which we've acknowledged, and we provided additional resources to support the sector in respect of those.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Ayres, a supplementary question.
What a disgrace. How many older Australians in residential aged care died in the 26 days it took for the Morrison-Joyce government to listen to the warnings and to finally act?
Minister.
Mr. President, I completely reject the premise of the question in the context that the Prime Minister said that it wasn't a shadow workforce. It isn't a shadow workforce, Mr. President, and we still say it's not a shadow workforce. The measure that we introduced yesterday, Mr. President, was a targeted approach to support particular facilities that are in significant levels of stress with respect to workforce. That's what we're doing. We're not providing a shadow workforce, Mr. President, as that lot over there dishonestly try to imply. That's not what we're doing, Mr. President. And yes, unfortunately, over the course of the pandemic—
Minister, resume your seat. Senator Ayres.
The point of order's relevance. The question was very direct. Over the course of the 26 days, how many older Australians died in the residential aged care system for which the minister is responsible?
The minister directly addressed your question at the start of his question. I believe his answer has been directly relevant to the question. The minister has 18 seconds remaining. Minister, I am listening to the remainder of your answer. You have the call.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I haven't done a calculation based on who died on what day and who died on another day, Mr. President. And as I told the Senate committee last week, there is actually a lag in the data. Unfortunately, there is a lag in the data, and that's been demonstrated by some jumps in figures over the period of time. But we continue to work closely with the sector in support of them through the pandemic.
Expired. Senator Ayres, a second supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. If the minister can't answer that question, how many older Australians were locked in their rooms without a wash for days? How many were left in soiled pads? How many were left with untended wounds? How many were left unfed and neglected? In the 26 days it took for the Morrison-Joyce government and this minister to listen to the warnings and finally act.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. And if anyone ever wanted an example of how the Labor Party are exploiting the pandemic rather than dealing with the pandemic, which is what we're doing, Mr President, there's an example of it in that question, Mr President. What a disgrace. And Mr President, what a complete disgrace. You should be ashamed of yourself, Senator Ayres. You should be ashamed. Mr President, the aged care sector is under extreme stress in this country. We've acknowledged that. The Prime Minister, all of us from the Prime Minister down have acknowledged that. And we continue to work with the sector in support of them and, most importantly, the residents that are in the aged care facilities. And, Mr President, the catastrophic approach that the approach that the Labor Party is taking, Mr President, to demonising the sector and the effects are making it very, very difficult, Mr President, for us to strike the appropriate balance about having residents having visitors or not having visitors and being locked in their rooms. So, Mr President, their approach is actually hurting residents in aged care and not helping them.
Senator Davey.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister for Emergency Management and National Recovery and Resilience, Senator Mackenzie. Minister, we've recently seen some extensive flooding across Australia, including in my state around Griffith in the Riverina, to the north of the state, in Queensland, Western Australia and South Australia, to the point that we have seen disruptions to our freight supply chains, as well as incredible damage to a lot of small businesses and farmers. Can the minister update the Senate on what the Liberal and Nationals government is doing to support communities affected by these flooding events and severe weather across the country?
Order. Senator Watt. Senator Watt. Order. Senator Watt. The Minister for Order in the chamber. The Minister for Emergency Services, Senator Mackenzie. Emergency Management, sorry.
That's so good. It's a very long title. It's great to be back, and thank you so much, Senator Davey, for the question. With the La Nina, the floods that have swept across particularly the east coast of our nation over the last 3 months have been catastrophic and devastating, including the loss of so many lives. We stand shoulder to shoulder with affected communities and individuals as they make their way through natural disasters, respond and recover, and build natural resilience into the future. We've got the $85 million Natural Hazard Research Australia money. We've got $40 million dedicated to strata resilience. The North Queensland flood recovery, we were able to put $1.58 billion on the table. $2.8 billion is being committed to the bushfire recovery. $600 million for preparing Australia better respond to natural disasters in the future. $13 billion alone from this government to assist impacted workers through the COVID response, through both the pandemic leave disaster payment and the COVID disaster payment. Our government has put $12 billion in conjunction with states and territories to support these affected communities from natural disaster. In fact, no government in our nation's history has stood with Australians in times of need like the Liberal National Government. Through bushfires, cyclones, earthquakes and floods and COVID, this government has been providing boots on the ground and financial assistance to both individuals and communities to help them at their time of crisis. We're helping people recover funding for clean-ups, financial assistance for small businesses and primary producers. The last 3 months alone, we've activated assistance for natural disasters 20 times, with $50,000 grants for primary producers.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Davey, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Minister. Can you also explain to the Senate how our government is utilising the Emergency Response Fund and strengthening Australia's emergency response and disaster preparedness so that we're ready for them instead of waiting for them to happen?
Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Senator. And we do live in the country of droughts and flooding rains. The next natural disaster is simply around the corner. And in this country, we spend 97% of our money and effort on responding to a natural disaster and only 3% in preparing for the next one. Our government has fundamentally flipping the response of the federal government in this country to get ahead of that. And the Labor government is playing games and politicking with the Emergency Response Fund. It is being used and spent in exactly the way it was designed, in fact in exactly the way the Labor Party voted for it to be used and spent. The fundamental issue they seem to forget is this is a future fund. And this side of politics has not seen a future fund that they cannot wait to raid, that they cannot wait to spend in the here and now. They're salivating to get their hands on it, instead of actually ensuring this money is put away to prepare for catastrophic disasters in our nation's future. Sorry, apologies.
Minister, your time has expired. There was a lot of noise in the chamber, Senator Keneally. There was an excess of interjections in the chamber from one side of politics. Senator Davey, a second supplementary question.
Thank you very much. Finally, can the minister please outline how the government is mitigating disaster risk and building our national resilience?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, we're not just focused on recovery. The Liberal Nationals government is also focused on mitigating disaster and building our resilience. We're the first government to have dedicated an entire agency with a sole focus to ensure we are prepared as we can be for natural disasters, built on solid research and science, and that's the NRRA. The government's National Climate Resilience and Adaptation Strategy positions Australia to better anticipate and adapt to climate variability, improving climate information and services to contribute to our future disaster preparedness. Under our government, $210 million has been invested to ensure that the Australian Climate Services was stood up, to use world-leading expertise and focus on supporting the NRRA and Emergency Management Australia to support decisions related to preparedness, response and community recovery from disaster. And we've got the PAP program, the Natural Flood Mitigation Infrastructure program.
Minister, your time has expired.
Yes.
Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Environment, Senator Hume. Experts have warned that without urgent action, koalas will become extinct by 2050. Loss of habitat, climate change and extreme weathers are the biggest threats to our koala population. Yet the Environment Minister has signed off on projects like the Brandy Hill Quarry expansion, the Vickery coal mine expansion and even the rail line to Adani that will decimate koala habitat and make climate change even worse. Why is this so-called Minister for the Environment putting the interests of mining companies and their big developer mates ahead of our koalas and our environment?
The Minister representing the Minister for the Environment, Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Hanson-Young for her question. Mr President, the Morrison government is taking action and investing $50 million over 4 years to boost the long-term protection and recovery efforts for koalas. This investment will protect and restore koala habitat. It will improve our understanding of koala populations. It will strengthen research into koala health and support training in koala care and treatment. Now, this new package takes the Morrison government's investment in koala recovery to more than $74 million since 2019. Mr President, the Threatened Species Scientific Committee has been undertaking a reassessment of the status of the listed koala following the impacts of bushfires and in addition to other threats such as land clearing, dogs, cars and disease. The Minister for the Environment, Minister Lee, is currently considering the advice within statutory timeframes. The draft national plan for the listed koala has been revised in response to the submissions provided during the public comment period, and the government intends to formally make that plan public as soon as possible. By working together with state and territory governments, with researchers, with land managers, with veterinarians, with community groups, we can all protect the koala for generations to come.
Senator Hanson-Young, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. The Prime Minister's package means nothing if the Morrison government keeps signing off on the destruction, the land clearing and the bulldozing of koala habitat. They can't be saved if they have no homes. When will this government back the Greens bill for a moratorium on the destruction of koala habitat? No home, no koala.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr President. The Morrison government's $74 million investment spans a range of threats and challenges for the koala, and that includes habitat protection. The management of habitat protection and land clearing are primarily the responsibilities of state governments, but where there are potential impacts on matters of national environmental significance, including the clearance of koala habitat, these may in fact require separate Commonwealth approval. The Commonwealth will thus continue to play a leadership role and to support the coordination of conservation outcomes for the koala across its range. The Morrison government's $74.3 million over 6 years, between 2019 and 20 to 2024-25, into projects that are benefiting koalas both directly and indirectly include $47 million to protect and restore the important koala habitat, $8.3 million for koala health, genetics research and medical support, and an additional $12 million for the National Koala Monitoring Program.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Hanson-Young, a second supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. No amount of cute photo opportunities with the Prime Minister is going to save Australia's koala population. When will this government finally declare koalas endangered, as the science is requiring, and to do something properly, seriously, to actually save their homes?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. Well, one of the things, Senator Hanson-Young, that the Morrison government did early on after the 2019-20 bushfires was to talk to an independent panel of experts about the needs of koala. The Minister for the Environment requested at that time that the Threatened Species Scientific Committee undertake an assessment of the status of the species. Now, that Threatened Species Scientific Committee has undertaken their assessment of the species, and she is currently considering their final advice in line with the statutory timeframes. In the meantime, there are projects to benefit the koala that are already well underway. The landmark National Koala Monitoring Program, which is filling key data gaps and will produce a robust estimate of the national koala population and monitor the health and condition of koalas. The habitat restoration and threat mitigation programs that I spoke of earlier in key koala hotspots in New South Wales and Queensland that focus on both bushfire and non-bushfire affected areas. And it includes a partnership with the World Wildlife Fund that is delivering habitat restoration projects in northern rivers of New South Wales and south-east Queensland.
Minister, sorry, your time has expired. Senator Birmingham.
Mr President, I ask that further questions be placed on notice